Yay! It worked! Awesome! Is it working? If we're a little late, it's fine.
Hello.
Yay!
Yes.
Hi, Anna.
Good to see us. Hello,
Thank
Matt.
you. Thank you very much, Yann.
You're welcome.
Here are my students, and appreciate it once again.
No, you're welcome. Let's jump in.
I think you're up. Okay. Do we introduce ourselves? Yeah, introduce
Good to see all you guys together.
So I'm Anna Risti.
Hello.
So I have a couple questions for you. My first question is, how much creative input did you have into the making of the movie? Like, for example, did you have any input into shaping the algae island, like a human body in the movie?
No, I had minimal input on the movie. Because after all, when Hollywood buys a book, it's like when you buy a car, you can drive it off the lot and you can crash it into a car, into a tree if you want. It's their property, so they can literally do anything they want with it. Now, obviously, it helps, especially with a book that did so well as Life of Pi, it helps to get the author on board. So quite regularly, the producer called me to talk. And early on, Ang Lee, the director, also, I met him. We talked a few times and he showed me the script a number of times, but I got the sense he wasn't interested in me wholesale rewriting it because after all, he had a screenwriter with him. I've just blanked out his name there. But so I sort of corrected little turns of phrases to make it sound like more Indian English. But you know what? My initial thought was that I'm a writer, I'm not a screenwriter. The way a film tells its story and the way a book tells its story are two very different languages. And I mean, I've seen, like everyone, I've grown up on movies, but I wouldn't call myself a closet screenwriter. So no, my input was fairly minimal. I visited the last 2 days of filming. Now I wish I had involved myself more because I thought that the movie looked beautiful, sounded good, but it didn't quite contain everything that the book did. Now, obviously, some things are lost. You know, the book is 320 pages or so. A screenplay is 110 or so, mostly dialogue, blank page, in other words. You obviously lose a lot. But I still thought the screenplay could have been a bit more nimble, could have been less literally faithful to the book and tried to tell a bit more of what it was about, this idea of two stories based on the same set of facts. So, but whatever, you know, I cried all the way to the bank, as I said. You know, the book did very well before the movie and did even better after the movie. So it goes.
Awesome. And then my next question is, I'm going to be a teacher. And do you recall what was best or worst about any teacher that you personally had?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I loved going to school. I discovered that, you know, you can learn from your parents, but fairly quickly you're set into a certain relationship. You're locked into a certain relationship with your parents, and your parents can't necessarily be good teachers. Whereas teachers, being outsiders, can play a really crucial role in your life. So I had amazing teachers. I had some bad teachers, some amazing ones. The amazing ones, first of all, I guess, were passionate. They really liked their subject, whether it was biology, math, history, geography, whatever. They really liked it. And then they were good teachers. In other words, they enunciated their lessons clearly. They made it interesting to me. So they, you know, as I say in Life of Pi at one point, they lit a match in my dark head. So they made the world really exciting because the world is really exciting. It's an amazing world out there. And those teachers were these conduits to that excitement. The bad ones, well, the bad ones were bored. The bad ones had favorites in the class. The bad ones were sarcastic. Even when you're a jerk, and after all, when you're kids, you can be a jerk. The teacher should see beyond that and see you're just trying to make your way. And, you know, teachers see dozens of, you know, over the course of their teaching career, you know, teachers will see hundreds of students. And therefore, they may seem like they're all one mass, but each one is a little individual. And even if, you know, each one of them may become president of the United States, but even if one of them becomes just an ordinary, you know, house husband, each one is a valuable citizen with a mind, and it needs to be shepherded properly. And so the ones that were bad were the ones who were indifferent to my individuality as a student. And, it's funny, I remember one of my favorite teachers was a geography teacher, Mr. Saunders. And when I won the Booker, they asked me, since you mentioned teachers in Life of Pi, tell us about some of your great teachers. I said, oh, Mr. Saunders in Ottawa. And they went to find Mr. Saunders, who now was, in his 70s. And they asked him, so, Yann Martel was, you taught him for 2 years in high school, at Ridgemont High School, it was called, actually. What do you remember of him? And the guy could not remember me for anything. He could not remember me at all. So he had this major impact on me. He couldn't remember me at all. That's the way it goes. But yeah, a great teacher is like a torch that lights up the darkness. A bad one is like a blanket that, falls on you and creates darkness.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Mr. Martel. Hi, my name is Izzy Stone. So I had a question about the theme, nature versus nurture. So I was wondering, what one do you think was more prominent in Pi when he was on the boat? Like nature being, he more stuck away from his vegetarian diet and he even became a bit of a cannibal at one point, or nurture, how he has to take care of Richard Parker and how he still knows that that's like something human that you would do.
Well, in asking a question, you've sort of given the answer. I think it's a bit of both, in terms of nature, nurture, in terms of who he is. Obviously, some of it is nurture. So, for example, his knowledge of animals comes from the fact that he grew up in a zoo with a zoo parent. His parents ran a zoo. So obviously, some of his knowledge of animals came from his nurture, but his toughness, his ability to survive, I think maybe it was just inherent. And we're all like that. Some people, in the face of adversity, sort of give up more easily than others. Some of us are more tolerant of pain than others. Some of us are more resilient than others. But it's also the tools that you're given by your parents and your environment. So in terms of Pi in the lifeboat, in terms of how he behaves, I think he does everything he needs to survive. And that means physically, he does, as you say, stray from his vegetarian diet. He eats fish, he eats turtle, he eventually maybe eats human. But also he takes care of the tiger, which is maybe taking care of his emotional side. There's nothing more crushing than absolute solitude, this idea that no one knows you, no one cares about you. That's a really hard emotion to live with. And anything that can alleviate that, including a 450-pound Bengal tiger, is worth nurturing. So that could be, that's maybe his more nurturing side. That's something that maybe so in all cases, he does what he needs to do to survive, both physically, but also emotionally. So I'd say it's a mixture of the two.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Connor.
Hello, Connor.
And so one of my questions is there's a lot of specifics behind ethnicity in the life of Pi. So was there any specific reason why the cook was French and the blind man was French and then they were Japanese shipwreck investigators?
Well, Pi is Indian because he's from India and I was in India, and India was where I was when I sort of started thinking about religion. My background is completely secular. I never went to church with my parents. I'm a completely non-religious background, and I studied philosophy at university, so I had a very low regard for religion, especially organized religion. And then it was in India that I sort of discovered that there's maybe something greater to religion that I hadn't noticed. That wasn't about evangelical maniacs trying to kill doctors and stuff like that. I saw sort of a more benign, rich expression of religion when I was in India. So I rooted the story there because that's where I happened to be. And also in India, there's many, many religions that coexist more or less well. And so that opened up the idea for me that he could practice more than one religion, because I wasn't interested in defending organized religion. I was more interested in looking at faith. And if I'd set this story in Italy, for example, which is overwhelmingly Catholic, it'd be rather odd to have an Italian boy who's also a Hindu and a Christian and a Muslim and a Buddhist. It'd be a bit odd for Italy. It was more natural for India. As for the rest, it kind of followed after that. Pondicherry used to be a French colony. The French famously eat anything that moves, frog legs, snails, the French and the Chinese are appalling in what they eat. And also I wanted a diverse story. I really believe in diversity. I'm your standard issue overprivileged white male, and the world is more than just that. And it's not a question of numbers. It's not a question of how many, gay Black Jews there are. It's just that they exist. And the very fact that they exist is like a color on the palette. You know, we want all the colors of the spectrum because that's what makes for white light. That's what makes for the richness of white light, is all its constituent colors. It's the same thing with diversity. So, you know, I like the idea of people being different. I don't want to be in a world where everyone looks like me. That would be unbelievably boring. So I like the fact that despite the fact that I'm a white male, I wrote a book where essentially there's very, 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 very few white males in the story. There's brown people and Black people and, you know, French people. And I just like that diversity. To me, that was a good way of telling the story. And it kind of reflects the reality of India and also of Canada and the United States too. You know, we come from a country of settler colonialists, and there's a lot of diversity there. And we do best if everyone's potential is unlocked and we all live together. And that comes through accepting and embracing diversity.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Grace Gaten. My question for you is based off Beatrice and Virgil, page 4. It said that Henry had written a novel because there's a hole in him that needed filling, a question that needed answering, a patch of canvas that needed painting. Do you relate in the same way to Henry? Is that why you write as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. Every book I've written has been an attempt to understand something. You know, writing a book is my way of understanding it. So in Beatrice and Virgil, I was interested in looking at the Holocaust, not as a historical event, because that's very well established, very well studied, but more about how it's represented in art, how we talk about it. Because what I've noticed with the Holocaust is that we're much more limited in how we talk about the Holocaust than we talk about war, for example. Everyone talks about war with great comfort. Every citizen has his or her opinion about any particular war. We tell war stories, war jokes. War is an unbelievably versatile canvas. The Holocaust is not. You know, we might tell a war story, but people are usually uncomfortable telling Holocaust jokes. They're held to be in bad taste. And of course, a joke told at the wrong time to the wrong person is in poor taste. But humor, just to take that example, humor can be very useful. First of all, humor can, you know, in telling a joke, you can be laughing at someone's pomposity. If someone is pompous, they're arrogant, they're missing the point somehow, and a joke can throw them off. So humor can be useful. Also, humor only works if you get it. So in some ways, if you tell a joke about something, you're implying that the other person knows the reality of something. Anyway, I found we were very limited in how we talked about the Holocaust. And so I wrote Beatrice and Virgil to say, how can we talk about the Holocaust in a way that is vivid, lively, and engaging, and doesn't require a ton of historical knowledge, and doesn't make people nervous? Because usually non-Jews, and I'm non-Jewish, usually non-Jews, eventually we get nervous talking about the Holocaust. We're afraid of offending Jews and Jewish memory, which of course it is important, but it's sometimes messy coming to an understanding of things, and we have to make mistakes, and we have to be allowed to make mistakes. So I wrote that one to understand the Holocaust. I wrote Life of Pi to understand religion, faith, that strange form of magical thinking. I want to understand that. My first novel, Self, is about a boy who at 18 becomes a young woman, is a young woman for 7 years, and then she becomes a man again. There I was just interested in learning about what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be gay? What does it mean to be straight? I was just curious about that. Those are fundamental identity traits that we all have. We're something or other. And in Canada, certainly we're becoming more open to that, to trans right, to gay. You know, we have gay marriage in Canada. Trans right has been a big thing recently over the last few years. You know, I just said earlier, but we have to unlock everyone's potential. Respecting those rights is important, but before we can respect them, we have to understand them. So I wrote Self for that reason. So yeah, it is exactly that. That's exactly why I wrote Beatrice and Virgil and my other books, to sort of fill out that canvas, fill a hole, answer a question.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Miles.
Hello.
Could you
Miles.
tell us something about your novels that you haven't told any other interviewers before?
Well, easy. I can tell you about my novel that I just finished. Because I haven't been interviewed about it yet. The novel I just finished is about the Trojan War. So that famous war between the Greeks and the Trojans about 3,000 years ago, that essentially yielded the very first book of the West. If we looked at all the books that have been published in the West, the very first book, the one that would be in the top left of the shelf, would be the Iliad by Homer. which was literally the first book written down when the Greeks invented for the second time writing. They invented it twice, the Greeks. The second time they invented it, roughly around the 8th century BCE. The first thing they wrote down of any extent, of any length that has survived, is the Iliad by Homer. It's the foundational, the first book of the West. And it is this amazing story. When I read the Iliad just a few years ago, I'd never read that classic before. I thought it'd be this dusty tome, vaguely boring. It wasn't. It's like Game of Thrones. It really is, minus the sex, but it's like Game of Thrones. It's this amazing, thrilling story. It's very cinematic. And it struck me, got my imagination going. And so my story tells the story of tells of the Trojan War from the perspective of a commoner. In the Iliad, every single person who speaks, with one exception, is a nobleman or a noblewoman or a king or a queen. My story is told from the perspective of a commoner. Anyway, no one knows that. As for my other books that are published, where I have been interviewed hundreds of times, not really. You know, when people talk about books, it makes them think and they ask a lot of questions. So I can't off the top of my head think of a question that I haven't been asked. That's maybe for you to think of a question that I haven't been asked before. And I don't know, try your luck at that next time.
Right. Thank you, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you.
Okay, hi, my name's Nathan, and my question is, what's your favorite scene in the movie that was interpreted from the book?
I'd say scenes, plural. To be honest, as I said, I found the storytelling a little bit leaden, and Ang Lee threw in some things that were not really relevant. Like at one point you have Pi reading The Outsider by Camus. He had a pretty girl dancing because he wanted to add some sort of sexual romantic tension. But the thing that I liked the most that stayed with me was just those visuals of the boy in the lifeboat with the tiger. You know, in my mind, it was a little movie in my head when I was writing the book. But to actually see that, to see this orange and white lifeboat with this orange and black tiger and this brown kid, that was kind of neat to watch. So I kind of appreciated that. It was kind of neat to see certain scenes of Pondicherry, because very, very few American movies are made in India. So it's kind of neat to see, because I've been to Pondicherry, so it's kind of neat to see certain scenes there. To be honest, I've kind of mostly forgotten the movie. You know, I wrote the book and I was happy with the book. And the movie was kind of like this circus going through town. It's very loud and noisy, and then it vanished. So I haven't really thought much about it. I did like the music. The music, which was by a Canadian composer. He won an Oscar for it. I quite liked the music. That was lovely. It's rare to see. Indian music is amazing music. You hear a bit of it in the Beatles, and you know, Ravi Shankar is very well known, but it's amazing Indian instruments. The sitar is an amazing instrument. So it was lovely to hear Indian instruments in an American movie. So I like that too.
All right, thank you for answering.
You're welcome.
I had some students interested in hearing about the Oscars and the Academy Awards. When you went, they weren't quite as interesting as this year. Maybe you heard that Will Smith was. Would you tell us about the Oscars at all? And like I said,
well, the Oscars. Well, it was a bit disappointing. You know, Hollywood is a strange place. It's full of incredibly creative people. Really, truly is incredibly creative people. But unfortunately for them, the cost of their creativity is staggering. To make a movie is unbelievably expensive, which means everyone is creative and halfway to a nervous breakdown, which means they behave in sort of slightly strange ways. So Hollywood is full of walls. You cannot get in for life or money or anything. It's so hard to get into Hollywood. But once you're in, suddenly it's unbelievably free. So it was a very odd thing for me. For years, Hollywood studios were sniffing around Life of Pi, wanting to make it. Various directors were involved, various screenwriters, and always fell to the side, because unlike a book, which basically just needs one author, a movie requires, you'll see that when you see a movie, how the credits go on for, you know, hundreds, and especially these big productions, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. Well, you have to find these hundreds of people. They all have to be available. And that's not easy. Sometimes it's just one star is missing, and that's it. Or if the director is missing, you know, has some other commitment or something happens. And before they finally get in a lock, it takes a million years to get the light to go green. And once it goes green, and then suddenly everything starts happening. And it's really interesting. I would have thought, being so expensive, they'd be really efficient. Well, it's amazing, they're not. See, once they get the green light, and it's so expensive, they say we've got to, we got to stay within the budget. But somehow, once they green light it, I was amazed how wasteful the process is. So, just for example, you've all seen that thing of the thing on plaque, take 2, take 3, take 4. Well, every time they take a take of a scene, it costs money. It takes time. So you'd think they'd storyboard it so carefully. You'd think they'd rehearse the act. After all, like for example, when you go and see a play, you don't have the actors halfway through a scene say, wait a second, I forgot a word here. Let's start it again. Or, wait a second, I'm hungry. I'll go and take a break. No, when you see a play with professional actors and it lasts 2 hours, it lasts 2 hours because they do it flawlessly for the whole 2 hours because they're professionals. Now, I'm not saying that it would take 2 hours to film a 2-hour movie, but you would not believe how wasteful the process is, how for a 2-hour movie, they will have literally dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of hours of extra filming that they did, all at great cost, all involving these expensive actors and all this and that. So I was kind of interesting at the start. I was involved, as I said, the producer called me regularly. Then when it finally came to the Oscars, it was delightful that it was nominated for a lot of Oscars. And then when I went to Hollywood, to LA for the Oscars, I think it's the Kodak Theater where the Oscars used to be. I don't know where it is now, but it's not that big a theater. It is big enough, but it's not that big. And there's so many movies nominated that finally I never got to the ceremony itself. Instead, I went to some party, to some ceremony for people slightly further away are invited. So it was rather odd when Ang Lee won the Oscar, and the first person he thanks is me. And I'm saying, well, if you really were that thankful, you could have got me a seat in the actual theater, not at some party where I was between a dentist and some real estate agent, both of whom were somehow related to in some way to someone involved with Life of Pi. So I kind of felt pulled to the outer ring because I was no longer useful. But, as I said, LA is a really creative town. It's a crazy kind of city with a lot of creative types. And I had a really good time there. And I was thankful for the Oscars because it helps the movie and it rewards people who work unbelievably hard. Ang Lee is one of the hardest working people I've ever met. He really takes on his art form, and when he commits to doing a movie, he does one movie at a time. He told me he'd never worked harder on a movie than this one, and so I was glad that he was rewarded with the Oscar. I said the only weakness, in fact, was the cheapest part of the movie, which was the screenplay. I just wished that he had and I told him, be inventive, reinvent things if you want. I told it in words because that's what was needed. You're telling it in images. That's a different language. Be inventive. And his screenwriter wasn't quite as inventive as I wished he'd been. But as I said, whatever. That's the way it is.
And speaking of drama, your play, Life of Pi, is now a play. And have you seen it? And if it gets near us, I'm certainly going to offer it for extra credit. But after they graduate, I'm sure they'll go. Can you tell us about the play that's making its way around the world?
The play, in fact, is very, very good. It's I would say it's better than the movie because it tells more of what the book's about. And whereas the magic of cinema is real, it's real magic, but at the same time, it's kind of fake magic because it is made of human hands, but computers, by overuse of computers, I kind of shrug eventually. I see these movies with amazing special effects, and at one point I say, well, that's great, but it's just generated by a computer. It doesn't feel quite as authentic, whereas the play, the magic, you can see it being made by people right in front of you, and yet it's still magical, but it's a much lower tech magic. But it's still marvelous. So the book, I think, the play gives you a real sense of wonder. They have a stage where the lifeboat just rises out of the floor, it turns. They use some projection and some projection of images. It's just really amazing. It really is very effective, and it's done right in front of you, like a musician. You can see his hands moving and things come out, and it's extremely well done. The storytelling is a little bit clunky at times because there's a lot to pack in, but it gathers momentum, and it's done very, very well. So it's playing in London now. It's going to Toronto after that, then Boston, then Chicago, and then New York. So it's still in your country, on your continent, just halfway across, but it's doing very well in London despite COVID. So I'm hoping it'll start touring the country. It may come to the West Coast. Sometimes these big productions go to LA or go to San Francisco. No, I don't know if we'll go to South Dakota, but you know what? I don't think it's going to come to Saskatoon where I live anyway. So either way, you're going to have to travel if you want to see it. But I'd say it is better at a fraction of the price. It is better than the movie.
Excellent. A final question. I love your Stephen Harper project. What was he reading? Can you offer these students maybe something to read before they're 20? And why? Some other novel that they might not pick up in class.
Okay, sure. Well, that asks a question of why bother reading. A lot of people, a lot of cultures operate without the written word. But our society is now so complex that I think it's important to read, if only to nourish your imagination. So it's not a question of reading every single day. It's not a question of reading the current bestseller, but you do want to nourish your imagination with a book, because through our imagination is the best way to understand reality. Because in a book, you get into the skin of someone else. You walk in someone else's shoes. You are someone else for the duration of that book. And that's useful. It means you've lived another life. So every good book you read, you live in a sense an extra life, and you get all the wisdom of that extra life. So, the book I'd recommend is, the very first book I sent Stephen Harper, who was another one of these overprivileged white male. And he has never managed to get beyond that. He's never managed to see beyond his own experience of life. Now, when you're overprivileged white male, usually it's a good life. So he hasn't been able to understand maybe the lives of women, the lives of Black people, Indigenous people, gay people, handicapped people. All of those he somehow sees through the lens of his own experience of life, and sort of tosses aside alternate experiences. And so that's why I sent him all these books to say, hey, there's more lives out there than yours. Read these books and understand that. And so the very first book I sent him, and is one I'd recommend to anyone, is called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, by the Russian writer of the 19th century, Leo Tolstoy. And it tells the story of a man who one day is putting up a curtain rod, and he slips and he bumps and he hits his side and he gets a little bruise. And that bruise, he just says, oh, no matter, it'll go away in a few days. Well, it doesn't go away. It really keeps on hurting, and it really hurts. And eventually what happens is, and I don't know if this is medical, it makes medical sense, but eventually he starts to die. The little bruise somehow triggers something, a tumor that was there already, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But slowly, Ivan Ilyich starts to die. And this amazing novella, 70, 80 pages, it's about a dark subject, this man dying, but it's incredibly funny and witty. It's all about his reaction to dying and the reaction of those around him. So his wife, for example, is only concerned about his pension. Will she get his pension? His friends, who like playing this card game where you need 4 people, are annoyed that if he's dying, if he's dead, they only have 3 of them now. And who are they going to have as a replacement for this card game? They're all appallingly indifferent to his suffering. There's only one person who isn't, and it's a boy named Gerasim, who's a servant boy. And he comes up to Ivan Ilyich one day and he says, Master, I see that you're suffering. Can I do something for you? And as he asks him, he lifts Ivan Ilyich's legs to do something. Now, Ivan Ilyich realizes that he feels better with his legs raised in the air. So Gerasim says, oh, here, Master, I'll put your feet on my shoulders, and so you'll feel better. And Ivan Ilyich says, well, don't waste your time. You have better things to do. And Gerasim says, no, Master, it's totally fine. If you feel better, I'm happy to do this. So he's the only one who sees that Ivan Ilyich is suffering, and he's the only one who bothers himself to do something good for him. So it's an amazing book, and it doesn't matter, you don't have to, you could be a Tuareg shepherd in the middle of the Sahara. You'd read that book and you would realize what life is, and how, the best way to live it is to be open and alive and caring, rather than shut up like a crab. And so it's an amazing life lesson to learn. And you get that by reading this delightful tale of 70 pages. And that's the kind of books you want to be reading, a couple pages a night by your bedside table. There you go. You've read a, 365 page novel. one a year. That's good enough. So you always want to be in touch with the written word, because it takes a lot of effort to write something written, and therefore it will have a lot of wisdom. And that's an interesting reading just for entertainment, murder mysteries, Stephen King, whatever you want. You want to mix a whole bunch of things like that, and that just makes for a rich life of the mind.
Really appreciate it. It's been wonderful, and thanks again for your patience.
You're welcome, Matt. See you next year. Bye,
Okay.
guys. Bye-bye.
See you.
Yeah.